and talk about the transition plan for the URSO side and MPS.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Teal. Nice to see so many faces. Like Teal said, it's been a while that I've gotten to see so many of you, so it's kind of nice, even though it's virtual, at least getting to see familiar faces. So yes, the MPS transition to URSO and space sciences and chemistry to share is no small undertaking. And I just want to say that it's been already a big deal, and so many people have already been involved in this process. And a huge thanks to Teal for serving in the interim capacity as the CHAMPS regional director. She's been really instrumental in getting us, to where we are and keeping us organized. So it's been a great partnership thus far. Although the transition effectively for URSO will not launch until January 2022, we are already very much underway with the planning process for the transition. And so right now and through December, the plan is to have several transition meetings, many of which we've already started, collaborating with the MPS department managers, as well as one initial meeting with the CHAMPS team that is going to be transitioning to URSO. And we've already launched our staff trainings, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. So that's happening now, and that will be the focus but until the end of this calendar year. Come January 2022, we are launching the transition. And what I mean by that is we're starting the official work in supporting the MPS department. So it's the beginning of that, and that will continue. We'll continue 2022 with different staff trainings, as well as continuing to engage in the transition until everything is fully transitioned over to the URSO region. Some of the goals we have for the transition is that we really want to have frequent and clear communication. We understood and heard very clearly from the MPS managers that they want to be an integral part of this transition. They want to be very much engaged and collaborative in the process. And we've already met with them several times, and they have definitely proven to be good partners already. So we will continue to do that. We also want to have frequent and clear communication with our CHAMPS colleagues that are going to be transitioning over to URSO, and we've started that process already. We're pretty excited about the response that we've received from them. And so, all indications show that things are going in the right direction, despite how difficult and disruptive a change like this is. We're looking forward to a meet and greet that we've organized for November 9th, where we will finally get to see each other in person. And so we're pretty excited about that. We want to make sure that our CHAMPS colleagues that are transitioning to URSO feel supported throughout this process. That's really important for me and for the URSO leader team. It's a goal that we have set and something we're taking really seriously, because we know what it's like to go through these things. We've been through them ourselves, and they're not easy. And so we really are making a priority to make sure our CHAMPS colleagues feel supported. We want to have successful handoffs from CHAMPS, and we want that process to be smooth. We know there will be some bumps. We'll try to minimize that. We'll try to anticipate the best we can, but no good plan is perfect. So we just want to try to have that as successful as possible. We also want MPS, not just the department managers, but the individuals that we will become partners with and liaison with, want them to feel engaged throughout the process. So the meetings that we've created are bringing in the right people for the right meetings. We know there's a ton of things, and so we're not trying to have every single person involved in every single meeting if they don't have to. But having managed several of these transitions myself before, there's not enough communication that can happen, and there's not enough planning that can happen if you want to have a successful transition. So engagement is really important. And then lastly, we want to have minimal service interruption to the faculty and those that we serve. These handoffs are big, moving to different systems. The URSO region does handle some of the transactions a little differently. And so we want to make sure that we can be smooth in that, in delivering service. Okay, next slide. So talking a little bit about the training plan. So this is something that is extremely important in the URSO transition. And the reason being, as many of you know, that the URSO research support model is a cradle to grave model versus a pre-post model, meaning that the research administrators do both pre and post. And most of the individuals that are transitioning to URSO from CHAMPS either do post or pre. So we want to make sure that the individuals feel empowered, trained, and ready to handle the pre-post model and portfolio. So the research administration training plan that we've put forward is our first focus. And actually our first session was yesterday, and we have 7 sessions before the end of the year that are already planned out and that the CHAMPS team has signed up for. And so we're looking forward to continuing those. So the way we're going to go about this is in different phases. We have 3 different phases. And the first phase is really focusing on our post-award administrators and ensuring that they understand and are trained up on the URSO post-award processes and systems. As you know, we have the intranet, we don't use the smart sheet. So there are certainly differences and different things that we do in our region that we want to make sure that the folks coming from CHAMPS feel comfortable and ready in January that they can start working under the URSO infrastructure. So that really is our focus until the end of the year, to make sure our post-award administrators are feel confident, understand, have the resources, the training on the URSO post-award processes and systems. Phase 2 will start in January. And that's where we will focus the training and the overviews again on the post-award administrators, and focusing the training there on the URSO and campus pre-award processes and systems. Some of the post-award administrators already have pre-award experience, just haven't been doing it most recently in their role. So for some, this will be, refresher. For others, it'll be a new area of growth and opportunity. So we're excited about that. But that will be the focus starting in January. And then phase 3 will start in February, and the focus there will be training the current pre-award administrators on both the URSO and campus post-award processes and systems. So there's a lot here in these 3 phases to get covered. And I have no doubt that our commitment in doing the training and the overview, and the commitment that I've already felt from the CHAMPS folks, that we will get this done. We understand that, there's a lot to cover here, and there's a lot of information, and we're hoping that the entire URSO team and our current infrastructure will certainly help fill any gaps as they might come up. But that together we'll be able to accomplish this. And the reason we built it out into 3 phases is just because there is so much. And, this is like, we got to keep working and doing this transition. And we still have, the regular work that we're all doing, right? It's like that typical saying where you're changing the tire of a car and the car keeps moving. That's kind of what we're all going through right now. So that's the RA phased training plan that we've put together. And then this last slide is just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're covering in the phase 1 training, which is the focus of the URSO post-award processes and systems. And so don't let these 4-hour sessions kind of scare you. I think it goes pretty fast. There's a lot to cover. And yesterday we had our first session, and you can kind of see there bulleted what we covered. And these sessions are being led by, so Leslie Goldstein is our contracts and grants director. And so she's really involved in these sessions. But then we have a handful of our senior research administrators, as well as our supervisors, that have been really involved and very thoughtful in planning these sessions out, the organization, the chronology of them. We've put a lot of time and thought into how to roll this information out in a way that makes the most sense. And we hope we got most of it right. I'm sure we'll hear if we didn't, and we'll make improvements. But that's the plan for the RA transition for MPS to URSO. And once Teal is done with her section, I'll be happy to take any particular questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cynthia. I'm always impressed with the level of organization and planning that you have in URSO. And it is really going to help everyone be able to learn these new roles more smoothly, while, as you said, continuing to do all of the work that we have going on. So those coming into SHARE, it's going to be a slightly different experience. There are a lot of similarities in some of the processes and systems that we use, although they will not all be the same. So, certainly use of PI portfolio will remain constant, but there may be areas where people will all be asked to do a little bit of extra training or development as we become familiar with the new staff and everyone is integrated into the SHARE organization. So one thing that I want to point out in kind of how we looked at this whole plan, Cynthia and I put a lot of thought into the staffing plan and who is going to SHARE and who is going to URSO. And so what we did was keep the RA teams as intact as possible. So those that are currently serving SSL or College of Chemistry are going to continue to serve those units. There have been some, slight changes just in the normal course of business. But for the most part, and where portfolios were mixed, we are already beginning to make those divisions and kind of help each team get a clean allocation and portfolio that represents the future state of the region they're going to. So for those that are coming to SHARE, they will, and I'll show you our future state org chart in a moment, so it'll be really clear. We're going to have two distinct teams that are coming, and one will serve SSL and one will serve College of Chemistry. And then the RAL will fall under the SSL team. And then the other two smaller ORUs that are coming over that are associated with chemistry would fall under the College of Chemistry RA team. The other important thing to point out is that this is a little bit different, despite the fact that SHARE Research Administration currently is also cradle to grave, like the URSO model. We have decided to continue when we bring the CHAMPS, these two distinct teams in, to keep them separate. And that's because the SSL and College of Chemistry have a variety of staff within their internal organizations. The faculty support assistants in the College of Chemistry and financial analysts in Space Sciences Lab that do a lot of the work that is integral to providing end-to-end research administration. And so we felt that for consistency with bringing these two units in, and in part based upon requests from leadership within those units, we are going to maintain for now the pre and post split for the staff coming into SHARE. We will not be changing anyone's job that exists in SHARE today based on the units we've served for the last 3 years. So what I'll show you in a moment in our org chart is we will have 4 teams, and 2 of those will be cradle to grave, and 2 of those will have a pre and post split. And that is based on the units being served. Services will begin to transition officially November 1st, but we're not going to move people's actual UC Path positions until January, so that it's a clean break in terms of reporting for the fiscal year. There's a lot of financial and budget aspects to this in the CHAMPS region, and it's simpler if we just have half the year on the CHAMPS ledger and then half in URSO and SHARE, especially because the URSO teams will also, that way we can do both at the same time in January. But we will begin to include CHAMPS staff in meetings, and Henry is already serving as the interim RA manager for CHAMPS. So that will help to plan the transition. He's already been meeting regularly with the supervisors, Anthony and Clarissa, that are coming to SHARE. So we hope that this will help to, keep the CHAMPS region stable while we do all of this transition work. I also wanted to unveil our new logo, which is here below, and it is the same looking logo, but you'll notice we have now incorporated Space Sciences Lab and College of Chemistry into our creative use of the word SHARE. Not really an acronym, but sort of an acronym. So I'm excited about that. I think it's really important that they feel represented, especially because SHARE is a newer organization, and the nature of this non-acronym allows us to do that. So we get to keep the same brand, but have everyone be included. So this will be part of our SHARE brand going forward, and We are planning to have our first all staff meeting with everyone coming into Share November 19th, which is the first date that I could find that worked for everyone. So I'm excited about that. We're all excited to welcome the CHAMP staff that are coming into our team. And I will show you now the new org structure. So, okay, so you all know Henry Chan, the RA manager in Share, and Henry has, up until recently, it's really been Henry and one supervisor in Share. And that has been a struggle, as we've all seen increasing workload across all of our teams. And so I was very thankful that we were able to bring in Clarissa and Anthony, the supervisors for Share, because we just really needed to have more people in that level. And David Wolf, who has been a part of Share since our inception, was also made interim supervisor within the as of September 1st. So just within the last couple months. So now we have a much more even and stable organization. And I'm really excited to be able to free up a little bit more of Henry's time to work on some of the important Share-wide reporting and business processes and practices and training materials and all of those important things, and really supporting and growing our supervisors. All of our supervisors are relatively new to supervising, having done it so for about a year or less each. So I think it's really important that Henry is able to really be there to support their continual career growth in these roles. And so we are going to have Clarissa supervising the SSL team, and all of these individuals are coming from CHAMPS. We are also in progress on a recruitment to fill a couple of vacancies on the SSL team. And then Anthony is coming for the College of Chemistry team, and all of these individuals are coming in from the CHAMPS team. And then the rest of the Share team is going to remain stable. We've had a couple of change outs in supervisors to align groups that serve similar PIs within a given set of departments, well, particularly the psychology group, just to align that better. But for the most part, this is pretty stable. And we do have one vacancy as well in the Share RA team as a result of David's promotion to supervisor. So that is the Share org chart. And with that, I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Susan, have we gotten any questions directly to you? I don't see anything in chat. Okay,
No,
well, Teal and Cynthia, you did such a fantastic job of explaining everything that nobody has any questions whatsoever.
Thank you.
Well,
for
that's perfectly
sharing
fine, because we only have 5 minutes left.
Which is good.
Teal, thank you for sharing that org chart. That was very helpful, because I was curious to know, having moved from CHAMPS, I was curious to know which of my colleagues would be going to URSO and which would be going to Share. That was helpful.
Yeah, so if you cross-reference with the CHAMPS org chart, you can see the other half of the organization is going to URSO.
Right.
And the URSO org chart will be updated in January, and that will be online, and you will be able to see wherever. We already have it in a draft form, but didn't want to post it until it was effective in January. But if you go online to the URSO website in January, you'll see all the assignments and the new org chart reflected there, not just for RA, but also for HR and business and finance team as well.
Thanks.
Well, thank you both. Cynthia, I love your analogy of an organizational transition like this, changing a tire while the car is moving, because I've been through a few transitions and that is exactly what it's like.
Yes, for sure. And we can only, I just tell the team all the time, we can only do our best, right? And so
right.
A lot of work in a short amount of time. Everyone's working really hard, and we'll all, both in Share and CHAMPS and URSO, do the best we can.
Absolutely. Thank you guys again. You are more than welcome to stay for the next presentation, but I understand if you have to go, you both have very busy schedules.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. It's great to see you all. Enjoy the presentation.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. So Sabina, would you like to do our next introduction?
Yes. So our next presenter is Dr. Scott Stevens. I see that he has joined us already. Thank you. Dr. Scott Stevens is our first faculty presenter in the research presentations for RA series that we are hoping to launch. And he is going to talk about the wildfires that we're all facing in California. Dr. Scott Stevens is a Henry Vo Distinguished Professor in Forest Policy at UC Berkeley, and he is a professor of fire science. He is with the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management, or ESPM, as we all know it, in research administration. Dr. Stevens does research on the interactions of wildland fire and ecosystems. This includes how prehistoric fires once interacted with ecosystems and how current wildland fires are affecting ecosystems and how future fires management and climate change will impact the ecosystems of Western North America. Dr. Stevens has been testifying on this throughout the country. He has testified at the White House, at the U.S. Congress Subcommittee on Forest and Forest Health, and Subcommittee on National Parks and Public Lands. He also spoke to California legislature, to our governor, and he serves on a Little Hoover Commission that developed a statewide plan for forest management. So we're excited to have Dr. Stevens with us, especially during these times, to learn about his crucial research on the wildfires that we're all facing here in California. Welcome, Dr. Stevens.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very nice introduction. Thank you. And I appreciate being able a chance to talk with you today. And my goal is to get through my little slides. And so you can maybe ask some questions at the end. You know, one irony is today, today is October 20th, 2021, the 30th anniversary of the Oakland Hills Fire. The Oakland Hills Fire started 1991, October 20th. Of all things, it was my first semester here as a PhD student in fire. So my first semester on the campus is when the Oakland Hills Fire actually burned, and that's a whole nother discussion. But my goodness, that was a dramatic day back 30 years ago today. But today, let me talk about kind of like fire, California forests, kind of where we are and maybe where we're headed, and also maybe hopefully a little optimism of maybe some things that we can do to deal with some of the issues that are right in front of us. So I'm going to share a screen here for a moment and get it to go here. So this idea of what's next, forest fires in California's new climate reality. The picture right here in front of us is actually a prescribed fire we did probably about 5 years ago at UC Berkeley's Blodgett Forest Research Station. So we got a research station in northern Sierra Nevada, kind of in between Placerville and Auburn. And it's an area that we've been doing a lot of prescribed fire when we put fire on the ground for a management purpose and understand its effects, wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, preventing future wildfires, at least high intensity ones. So the question really becomes, and in terms of California forests, is where are we come from and where are we headed? And I just for a moment here, I'll show you an old photograph. This turns out to be the Bear Creek Guard Station, United States Forest Service, near another place that's near and dear to my heart, the UC Berkeley Forestry Summer Camp, where we teach undergrads. So that undergrad institution has been going up there since 1917. So it's about 104 years now. We've been teaching people in the northern Sierra Nevada, kind of crazy. But here's an early quote from Shao and Kotak, California pine forests represent broken, patchy, understock stands worn down by the attrition of repeated light fires from their observations in the Sierra Nevada. Extensive crown fire almost unknown in the California pine region. A crown fire is when we have a fire burn through the canopy along with the surface. So it kind of goes in one phenomenon. We actually burn the forest canopy as a crown fire. So here in 1924, a couple observations is this extensive crown fires basically almost unknown. And the question is, what about today? I think many of you, I bet, have personal connections to fire in this state. Friends, relatives, maybe even sadly, maybe yourself have lost homes, maybe lost loved ones. I want to acknowledge that because that is a big issue, right? I mean, it's a very emotional issue, very personal one. So if we look at today's fires, here's a little map I want to show everybody for a moment. So this is a map of a fire that happened in 2020. We call it the North Complex Fire. Down here in the lower left, maybe you see, this is Lake Oroville. So Lake Oroville is down here near the town of Oroville in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. So this particular fire ignited in the lightning storm that we had in 2020, when we had all those fires burning. We were smoked out for months at a time. I bet you remember that. The red is the area of the fire that basically you have over 95% of the trees killed. We call that high severity. This is from remote sensing satellite imagery, and you analyze it. And the greens and the yellows are basically areas where you have maybe 30, 40, 50%, 10% of the forest trees killed, but the majority survive. The ones that really get our attention are the red areas. And all fires kill trees. Okay, that is actually part of the ecology of California. But when you get these large continuous patches of high severity fire, the concern is all of our trees in the Sierra Nevada, when they have cones and the cones are mature, they open up and they disperse seed onto the ground. Small mammals and wind move it around, trees regenerate. But those seeds only live for about 4 or 5 months. Once they're released from the cone, they live 4 or 5 months or they die. And if you have a fire burn through the canopy and the cones are open, you basically sterilize the seed source. It kills them. In Yellowstone National Park, cones are closed on the Yellowstone pine. So you have lodgepole pine that are closed, the fire burns, opens up, the seed drops. We have none of that in the Sierra Nevada. Our systems are adapted to frequent surface fire every 7, 10, 15, 20 years or so. So when you get a big patch of high severity, some of these patches are on the order of 40,000 acres continuous. They're enormous. This just means this is a very difficult thing to think about how you even get a forest back, let alone try to keep it going in the future. 16 fatalities on this fire. This is considered an old growth place for a lot of mixed conifer forests. So these are the priors from a kind of an ecological and certainly societal problem. We try to basically do something to try to prevent or reduce their impact. Maybe you remember, I remember the day, the big red patch here is one about 12-hour run. The fire came from up here and actually blew downhill because of a northeast wind, a very strong wind, blew it downhill. I don't know if you remember, but there was a day in August 2020 when the sky in the Bay Area turned orange. I don't know if you remember that day. It was orange. I was out there sitting on my lawn looking at it and going, my goodness. I mean, you know what that was? That was the smoke from this patch transported to the Bay Area. It interacted with the fog that was on coastal California. That orange sky was actually from this fire that actually burned in August 2020. So the impacts are now just so far reaching. I mean, it's touching literally, I hate to say it, everybody in the state: smoke, air quality, economics, recreation. There's so many things connected to this, right? So I mean, that's a pretty tough thing to think about. Then the question is, what do we do about it? Can we do anything about it? And the answer is yes, we sure can. So I want to take you to Blodgett Forest again. The first picture on the slide was the prescribed fire I mentioned at Blodgett. What I'm going to show you here is a sequence of photographs from the same point, so we can kind of take a look how this place changes. Well, this turns out to be a mixed conifer forest at Blodgett. Mixed conifer is sugar pine, ponderosa pine, white fir, Douglas fir, California black oak, one of the most common conifer forests in California. Beautiful, really important for carbon sequestration, water supply, aesthetics, recreation. But this place we're looking at right here this is 2001. And what you're looking at here is an area that basically used to burn every 7 to 15 years, both from indigenous tribal burning or lightning fire, burned every 7 to 15 years. We have a tree ring record that goes back to 1650 from this place, but we have that data and you can see the intervals. Has not burned since about 1897. 1897, no fire. And it's also been repeatedly harvested, just like a lot of California forests have, to get wood for timber, things of that nature. So the culmination of that is this is kind of the condition of most mixed conifer forests in California. This is not some sort of anomaly. Okay, this is what we got. What we see here is a big sugar pine in the center. A lot of smaller trees have basically grown in as we kept fire out. Fire was the thinning agent. It used to thin this forest, reduce regeneration, open up areas for shrubs, grasses. You take that fire out for a long time, you're just going to get more trees to regenerate and grow. And we have a lot of surface fuel on the ground. That's a deadened down wood. We also have a lot of small trees provide vertical continuity of fire, possibly into the overstory. We call those ladder fuels. So what are we going to do? We're going to use a prescribed fire, just like that picture on the first photograph I showed you. We're going to do a prescribed fire to try to reduce forest density, reduce fuel loads, and try to begin a restoration of this mixed conifer forest. So there's a picture of our prescribed fire in that particular unit. You can see it's at night. We're burning at night because relative humidity is higher, temperatures are lower, and we use that weather as our ally to try to keep the fire inside the area we want to burn and not to jump the fire line. You can see maybe all these sparks. You know, when you're on a fire at night, you almost wonder why the whole world doesn't burn down. There are so many sparks that come off fires. It's just literally captivating. But if you got relative humidity, maybe 50% or higher, there's enough moisture in that air that it actually deposits a little bit of moisture on the fine fuels on the unburned areas outside your unit. And when those sparks come down and touch that area, over 99%, far more than 99% will not start a new fire. If the relative humidity is about 25%, 28% or lower, that just means the atmosphere is so dry, it's pulling the moisture out of those surface fuels. It gets them dry enough that when those sparks land on them, you could get 90% of those starting new fires. So we call those spot fires. Spot fires simply means embers or sparks coming out, deposited downwind, and they can start fire. So we're burning in conditions where that is very low probability. And this is what we're doing here. Now let's take a look. Remember that big sugar pine I showed you? There it is. So there's that big sugar pine after the first prescribed fire. And you can see certainly we've consumed an awful lot of that surface fuel. In fact, we consumed about 80% of it. And it turns out we killed about 85% of the trees 12 inches in diameter or smaller. And that was the goal. The goal is to reduce forest density. The density of forest is way too high. You're probably talking 350 trees per acre. When indigenous people manage this area and also lightning fire burn, we're probably looking at maybe 60 trees per acre, 60 big trees per acre. Now we got on the order of 300. So that's how much change we've seen in these systems. So we're trying to kind of, get back and get some more of that resilience. Most of these smaller trees, we can't tell, but they're dead. They're dead now because of the scorch and the heat going up in the canopy, killing the leaves. Let's go forward now. So here we are. This is just right after the fire. Here's a few more years. So we start to see some of those dead trees starting to come down, don't we? Not surprising, the rot and the microorganisms are dropping those, snow and other things, wind. And we also see shrubs starting to regenerate down here. We see some shrubs regenerating, and that's a natural shrub. It's a ceanothus. So that's part of kind of succession of forest communities change. What are we going to do? We're going to burn it again. So here we got a second ignition, and here's that same tree. I remember when I had the drip torch, I set this ignition, and I just said, well, I'm going to take a photograph here and take a look at the fire. So what's it look like after the second fire? There it is. So now we've had two fires in this site, and boy, it's starting to look a little different, isn't it? You're starting to see much more. Remember that first photograph? It was really a wall of foliage here. You couldn't see even past really this first line. Now we're starting to see kind of the stand conditions, right? The little larger area. We still see some deadened down wood on the ground, hasn't been all consumed. We also see some of the shrubs actually got missed by the second fire. Interesting. And a few more trees die and a few more are still standing dead. So that's that second fire. Now let's go a few more years forward again. Okay, there we go. More of the trees have come down that have been killed by the first two fires. We actually see more shrubs regenerating, which is our native shrubs. So what are we going to do? We're going to burn it a third time. So here's the third fire. So ignition for the third, and then this is kind of what it looks like today. So at the end of the day, we've done a lot of research up here and published papers on wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, forest insects, invasive species. I mean, I think we probably published 50 papers from this study. At the end of the day, we find that the prescribed burning is really right inside the ecological wheelhouse of these forests. We're not harming really anything. We might see a slightly increase in invasive herbaceous plants in some places. We see maybe some vectoring in of herbaceous non-native plants, but very low levels. But in terms of kind of the outcome of these three fires over 20 years, we end up in a place now that at least a simulated fire, if a wildfire hits this site, a bad one, a little like that one I showed you earlier, the North Complex, we would expect 50 to 70% of the trees in the overstory to live. So the forest is in a position now that it can take a hit from a fire. It also is in a better position to take a hit from climate change and increased temperature, also bark beetle impacts. So we begin this kind of transformation to this new condition. And one thing about this is so important, the fire never ends. You've got to keep in here. And that's what tribes of California have taught me. Stewardship of the land goes on forever. And we are stewards of the land, and we do active stewardship. We're working with the system. And I've had some really great projects with tribes, just beginning 3 different tribes in California, and they talk to that to a person, this idea of active stewardship. So it's not like you can ever stop. You know that. You work with your gardens. You can't just stop your garden, right? The same thing happens here. You've got to work with the system, okay? And here, prescribed fire wasn't the way to do it. Now let's look at a different method. Now we're not going to use any burning at all. We're just going to use machines, mechanical. We're just going to use mechanical systems. We're not going to use burning at all. Here's a similar condition. There's a tree up here in the upper right. Hopefully you see the little arrow. That's a California black oak with a V. So I want you to watch that tree as you go forward. So we're starting an initial condition. Same study, same place, but we're going to use a machine to try to do some restoration. There's the machine. It's called a masticator. It grinds up trees in place that are not available to go to the sawmill to make lumber. About a tree 10 inches in diameter is actually very hard to sell right now, unfortunately. New technologies are actually on this to try to make biochar and other things, but at the time we didn't have that. So the masticator goes in, and there's that California black oak over there, all right? And you see, certainly it's a thinner forest. Machine is reduced forest density. Unfortunately, we see a lot more surface fuel on the ground from the machine actually leaving the limbs and the tops that basically did not go to the sawmill. So this is kind of our first initial condition afterwards. So let's go forward again a few more years and watch that oak. We start to see more regeneration happening in the understory. Not surprising, right? Forests are growing back, seeds are being dropped, trees are growing. Let's go a little further. Here we got a few more years, and we start to see, yeah, understory trees get a little more moderate in size. Okay, they're growing. Eventually, they could become more serious fire hazards. So what do? We go in with our machines and harvest again, and we also thin the system, and this is what it looks like today. So by no means is this an exact duplicate of what fire does. This is not a pure duplicate. It doesn't recycle nutrients. It doesn't produce smoke. But at the end of the day, carbon sequestration in this system is very high. We actually have a condition now that if we have that wildfire that burns like the North Complex, we're still going to keep about 50 to 70% of the trees alive. So we have this kind of condition that accommodates future fire, climate change, and other factors pretty robustly. And one more thing I'll say about this is sometimes people think this is a timber grab. Somehow you're just generating timber revenue for a company, things of that nature. But when you do restoration, you go into these places and you say, what do I want to keep? Why do I want to keep it? Maybe different species composition, different sizes, different distributions spatially. Anything outside that you take. And that's what we did here. So we went in with the eyes forward saying, what do we want to keep? And then how do we maintain that system in the future? That anything in excess of that, we actually sold and make money for the university. But it's a restoration focus. It's not a timber grab, okay? I want to show you a moment here for one more instance, and I want to hopefully get some questions from you. We're going to Yosemite, one of my favorite places, maybe yours too. So Yosemite National Park, there's down here, that's Yosemite Valley. Maybe you can see my little cursor. And right about there is Half Dome. Right behind Half Dome is this place called Illilouette Creek Basin. It's just a watershed inside the park that actually has Illilouette Creek burning through it. The thing about this place is interesting. 1972, the National Park Service said, we're going to allow lightning fires to start burning in these systems. We're not going to put them out anymore. We're going to let fire come back, but we're going to use lightning fire. And over there to the right, you see some images of areas that have been burned by lightning fire. And we've been working in there for about 21 years now. The next little picture shows you kind of the jigsaw of all the different fires that have been burning out there. They hit each other. Sometimes they go out on their own. Sometimes they burn over each other. But this is kind of the tapestry of burning in this watershed, about a 40,000 acre area. Here's a picture from a helicopter. A friend of mine took this, and you can see this has got some higher elevation forest. We see a lot of rock, but forest kind of in the low areas. This is a lightning fire, the Hoover fire that burned in 2001. And when we actually then look at the Hoover fire, down low, this is a patch of mortality that was created. But you also see, boy, you got a nice regenerating forest in there, don't you? You see that natural dynamics happening where you have the patch is not so large. The average patch size of high mortality in this area is 10 acres, 10 acres. And most patches are actually maybe 1 or 2 acres or less in terms of number. So there's always plenty of trees in the vicinity generally to put more seed down. And that's what regenerates that forest. So this is kind of what the Illilouette Creek looks like. It's really easy to get to this place. All you got to do is take the road to Glacier Point, get to the Mono Meadows trailhead, and take a little about 2-mile hike in, and you're in this site. Pretty darn accessible. So let's look at some things that actually happened here. Boy, we've had some great grad students working here. Gabrielle is here doing some work. So on the left is an image of 1970 from air photography from Yosemite. And Gabrielle and a bunch of good students did some work to try to classify the vegetation. The gray is rock, the green is forest, and the brown is shrubs. And one thing about Yosemite National Park, they were just as good at putting out fires as the US Forest Service. They put out fires, all of them, until around 1972 when the policy changed. Then that fire started coming back, and about 45 fires have burned in Illilouette since 72. The culmination of that is on the right. So this is the same image, but it's basically 2012. And you see the green area has been really reduced, right? And you also see an awful lot more heterogeneity in there, a lot more dispersed vegetation. At the end of the day, the forest area has been changed, reduced by 22%. It doesn't mean that the forest has been thinned. You know, you have less trees per acre or things like that. This is forest changing to something else like wet meadows, dry meadows, and shrubland. We've changed that ecosystem from really, I would say, almost wall-to-wall trees and a bunch of rock to a mosaic of vegetation over that whole area, and actually much more heterogeneous. And this has really increased the resilience of this system. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But wet meadows increased by 200%. Dry meadows increased by 200% since 1972. And the shrublands increased by 30%. And the forest area has been reduced by 22% over the area. Remember, this is the culmination, 1970, 100 years of fire out, both indigenous burning and lightning fire. So the trees were able basically to increase, just like I showed you that picture of Blodgett. Over on the right is when fire starts working that land to bring it back to something different. And that's what we see. And I want to show you one more slide, then hopefully get some comments from you. Water. We all know water is a big deal in California, okay? So we brought in some hydrologists in here. And one thing we found is amazing is when you look at the amount of water leaving Illilouette Creek, this is Illilouette Creek down here in the little blue, and the pinks are wildfires, perimeters are burning. The dark green is Yosemite. You can do something called a runoff coefficient. The runoff coefficient is basically how much water leaves as stream water per unit water in either rain or snow. In Illilouette Creek, since 1972, when the fire started to come back, it's either increased slightly or remained stable. The amount of water leaving Illilouette Creek has either increased a little bit or remained stable since 72. All these other watersheds out here that are in kind of this purple color, that are in similar forest, similar elevation, and had no fire, very little pink in there, very little fire. Every one of those things has had a significant decrease in runoff coefficient since 72. So we see less water coming out of the areas at full fire suppression, and we actually see more water coming out of the areas where fire's been allowed to work. During the 2012-15 drought, there was less mortality. Less than 10% of the trees died inside Illilouette Creek versus outside because of the more resilient forest condition. And climate change, as it changes climate and makes it more volatile and warm, we actually done some modeling. Katia did a nice, incredible paper there that showed us essentially that we're actually think this is robust in climate change too, that this actually, the water production and stability and also the resilience of these systems can be maintained in climate change. And so that is an amazing story. I think it just shows us the coupling of the forest ecosystem to water. We're also doing work on wildlife habitat up here. That's another conversation. But it's an amazing place to go today. There's only 2 places like this in California, Illilouette Creek and a place called Sugarloaf Creek in Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park. They're the only 2 places in California that have had this recent history of fire. Well, with that, I'll just, maybe here's a thing you can look at, some summary. California's doing pretty good on this. We've got some really nice grant programs coming forward. We get $200 million a year right now available for homeowner groups, nonprofits, state parks, even the Federal Forest Service to apply for grant funding, $200 million a year to actually do the restoration work we just talked about. This year, the number is $468 million for the Newsom administration. This didn't start until the last year of the Brown administration. Before that, this was something that was just not around. So this last 4 or 5 years have been real big changes. I give credit to the state of California. I wish this had started 30 years ago. We're behind the 8 ball now because we are really got some issues to deal with, okay? But I will give credit to the state government for actually making a move. We got to do the prescribed burning. We got to do the indigenous burning with our partners of tribes if they choose to work with us, manage wildfire remote areas. If we don't do this, that's the fundamentals. It's the state of the ecosystem. You can put all the technology you want into this system, better detection, satellites, all sorts of cool things. You know what? You don't change the state of this system, the fundamental, all you're going to do is chase your tail forever. That stuff is not going to change the state of the ecosystem and its vulnerability to climate change and fire. So MOU, the memorandum of understanding from Governor Newsom and the Cal and Forest Service chief to try to do 1 million restoration acres per year annually by 2025, a nice aspiration, something we need to do. We're not there yet. I hate to say it, we're not even close. The Assembly and Senate of California really taking this on. Bill's been passed the last 4 or 5 years, unprecedented in my 30-year career. Good work. Congress is working. I've been working with Senator Feinstein on some things for the last couple of years. There's some interest there. Of course, the U.S. Senate's got some big things on its table right now. Hopefully the fire thing bubbles up someday. Biden-Harris administration, I don't know. This is still why I got a question mark. I'm not exactly sure where they're headed. I'm hopeful that they might jump into this space. We need it. California National Forests are 59% of the forest area of California. 59%, 57%, 59 is one of those numbers. I think it's 57. So it's a majority. If you don't get the federal government in here working with their lands and they own the majority of forests, you really got yourself a big old giant change. So you got to have to work with them. I think we got 1 to 2 decades to change this trajectory. If we don't change trajectory in 1 to 2 decades, all we're going to do is we're going to be participants and watching out the window as the forest change right in front of our eyes. So with that, if there's any questions at all, I'd be thrilled to have them or any.
Yes, thank you. That's a very interesting presentation and eye-opening for us. We all remember last year when I personally walked out of the house and I thought Armageddon has happened, the end of the world, because of like, where's the sun? Where's the sky? What's going on?
Yes.
We do have a couple of questions for you. I'm going to read them out. The first one is, were prescribed burns not legal for a period of time? And are they legal now? And if so, are there laws that govern how and when prescribed burns can be done?
No, that's an interesting one. Prescribed burns at a time were totally illegal. And even before that, indigenous burning by Native people in this state was prohibited and actually could have been at one time capital punishment. So when you think about the indigenous people, and that's another thing I could have talked about, I've been thrilled to, the Amah Mutsun home range, Santa Cruz, halfway down to Monterey Bay, inland to I-5, Interstate 5, big area, right? And the chairman of the Amah Mutsun is a fellow named Val Lopez. And Val is a chairman of that tribal group. Val is just a brilliant individual, really interesting. He teaches in our classes here at Berkeley, which is kind of cool. But when Val talks about fire, the message he has for fire in California from the Amah Mutsun point of view, fire is a gift from Creator for the stewardship of the land. Fire is a gift from Creator for the stewardship of the land. And Amah Mutsun, North Fork, Mono, Nessasan, all these communities of California used fire as their #1 tool for managing their landscapes for food, medicines, medicinal purposes, cordage materials, ceremony. And when the Spanish came in, then the Mexican came in, then the American people came in afterwards through the succession of change in California. Very early, they said, we're going to stop all indigenous burning because we think it's harmful to the environment, it's harmful to our cattle grazing. And even then, there were laws passed by the Spanish and the Mexican governments preceding the American period to make all burning illegal. And we get into the American period, and it also had a debate in the early 1900s about this. It was called light burning. Some people thought we needed to do it in the early 1900s to maintain our forest ecosystems. Others thought that that was actually just crazy. They thought the Indian way of life was just some sort of nuts. They weren't sophisticated, wasn't Western technology. So they belittled it. They called it Paiute burning as a derogatory term. So at the end of the day, fire suppression wins. Eventually, Native people were able then to start burning more. Cultural burning, prescribed burning is legal today. You have to do a burn plan and a smoke management plan. Then you basically have to execute that to the best of your ability. And there are programs that allow you to do that. But it is legal enterprise in this state. And even today, you can actually be a private citizen and you can go through a curriculum and become a prescribed fire burn boss, and you can be the head of any prescribed fire in the state if you go through the curriculum and get certified. We copied the Southeast on that because the Southeast is a prescribed fire capital of the United States of America.
That's interesting. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, but we do have 2 more questions. I'm going to quickly read out to you. It seems like these fires have affected more populated areas in recent years. How do the methods discussed today help with that?
No, they sure have. That's been a game changer, right? The smoke, the orange sky, being in your house for days at a time, your small kids, people with asthma. I think the stuff we just talked about today, this idea that pre-work, the restoration work, if it burns, you're going to keep the forest intact. You're going to have a tiny amount of the emissions. You're going to have essentially the ability of that system to go forward, more indigenous burning. If we did that at the scale necessary, we would have an ecosystem then that we're working with, we're stewarding, and we wouldn't have the large high severity patches I showed you. We wouldn't have detrimental impacts to Lake Oroville. We wouldn't have those smoke episodes that bad. We will have smoke, but it'll be more chronic levels, okay, versus episodic levels. The only way we break this loose is doing more of those treatments. My back of the envelope calculation says we need to do 10 times more restoration work per year and keep it going forever.
All right. Another question. A less dense forest, does it sequester less carbon? Do
Well,
highly dense forests end up as net carbon emitters because of being consumed by the large wildfires?
No, you're on another one. This is a huge topic in Sacramento right now, because if you look at the forest today, our work and other people's work show that the amount of forest carbon in most of our forests in California, not every forest, but certainly the ones in the Sierra Nevada, the Klamath, other areas, is much higher than is sustainable. You can't keep that much carbon on that ground through, let alone current conditions, let alone climate change. So what we think has to happen is transform the forest to a smaller carbon density, but more sustainable, and then able to hold that carbon for long periods. And your question is a good one. That North Complex fire I showed you, we had 60,000 acres high severity patch. Those trees are still standing, but about 7 to 10 years, they're all coming down. And know what? They're all going to decompose. All that carbon is going right into the atmosphere. Massive amounts of carbon going in. So I would argue that you would probably want to do more restoration and actually get a more sustainable carbon structure and then keep it maintained into the future.
All right, that's very interesting. Thank you so much for this very interesting and informative presentation.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to let Hannah close out the meeting. We have a...
Yeah, I'm going to be really
3 minutes
quick. I
beyond.
know we have a minute left. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming, and a special thanks to Professor Stevens and Teal and Cynthia for their presentations today. Please be on the lookout for a very short survey about today's meeting. If you do have any suggestions for future meetings, I dropped it in chat, but you can email Anissa Jones, Sabina Gafarova, or myself, Hannah Holloway, your suggestions. And just a quick heads up, our next BRAG meeting is November 9th from 12:30 to 1:30, and we're going to have Katie Hudson from CGA and some folks on her team coming to talk to us about RA's favorite topic, closeouts. So don't miss that one. And Susan will be sending out a meeting invite and some more details on that November 9th meeting. And again, just thank you everyone for coming. It's been great.
Bye-bye. Thank you. See you next time.